Leslie had once believed that there were some secrets which, if left long enough, would simply dissolve into the past like a thick layer of dust settling over forgotten objects no one ever touched again. She had lived for many years clinging to that fragile belief, using it as a thin cloak that still somehow allowed her to breathe in a world full of judgment behind the gates of Fairmont Crest. But in the instant Alan reappeared, standing silently in the dim shadows along the stone path leading into the luxurious neighborhood, that illusion shattered like glass thrown from a balcony. His figure melted into the night, yet his presence was sharper and clearer than any light, making Leslie's heart contract in a sharp, stabbing beat. No one could precisely explain how he had come back, how a name that had been considered permanently erased from the lives of these people could suddenly step out of silence like that. The whole town had treated his disappearance as a closed page, a finished chapter, a story with no reason to be revisited. But in Alan's eyes, darkened by time, Leslie saw no relief of a man returning home. She only saw the thick layer of icy silence. That silence, without a single word of reproach, was enough to send her the unmistakable message that every escape route she had drawn for herself was now locked. Every false doorway she had constructed around that old story had already been noticed and snapped in two by him with just one look. In that brief moment, Leslie realized that the truth for which she had sacrificed both her peace and her conscience was no longer confined to the hazy realm of the past. It had stepped out in front of her, standing upright, sharp, and stripped of all veils. Eva, the child she had cradled from the earliest days, the one she had allowed herself to love as a granddaughter, as if she were true blood, and the person she had vowed to protect from every invisible knife life might wield, was in fact the biological daughter of Alan, the man Leslie had tried so hard to erase from her family's history. That single definition was enough to bring a sting to her eyes, because it dragged back every choice she had made over the years. All the times she kept silent when she should have spoken, all the moments she steered conversations away whenever Alan's name nearly surfaced, all the evenings when Eva sat before her with innocent, curious eyes that Leslie deliberately smothered with vague answers. She had not only hidden a name. She had hidden someone's origin, stripping Eva of her right to know, simply because she feared that once the truth came to light, the fragile balance she clung to would collapse. Now, in this collision between past and present, the proud walls Leslie had built around herself began to tremble. She had grown accustomed to the role of the strong woman, always standing upright amid the whispers of Fairmont Crest, always appearing to control everything, always knowing how to twist situations so she would never be the one on the weaker side. Yet Alan's return suddenly rendered all that armor absurdly fragile. Inside her chest, she felt not only the fear of being exposed, but also the cracking of a kind of pathological pride. The belief that as long as she stayed tough enough, she could control even the truth itself, could decide which parts of the past were allowed to exist and which would be buried beneath the tiles of the passing years where no one would ever dig. She had never really prepared herself for this day, for the moment when the man she believed gone forever would stand there again, carrying not only his old face but also the authority of a truth she had rejected. While Leslie shook inwardly, Eva remained completely unaware that her true identity was quietly rattling the foundations of an entire order so carefully arranged in Fairmont Crest. The young woman went on living, walking, loving, resenting, hurting, and rejoicing in a world she believed was built on solid, clearly defined facts. She could not imagine that the most basic root of who she was, where she came from, whose blood ran in her veins, was the sharpest blade poised to pierce the shiny shell of this wealthy community. Leslie understood that better than anyone. A single confirmed word linking Alan and Eva by blood could destabilize the balance of power that had been maintained for years at Fairmont Crest. Things that had always appeared solid, the standing of each family, the distribution of benefits, the unwritten agreements no one dared put on paper, might be overturned just by placing a name in its rightful spot on the family map. Eva did not know that she was carrying within herself a crucial link that could change the way people looked at her, at her parents, and at those who had raised and loved her. For Leslie, Alan's return was not merely the reappearance of a man she had wanted to erase. It was the tolling of a bell announcing that the secrets she had locked away in the darkest chambers of memory were beginning to surface. For years, she had treated those memories like sealed boxes that must never be opened, pushing them into the farthest corner of her mind, convinced that as long as no one touched them, they would sleep forever. But time, as it turned out, was not the cleanser she thought it was. It did not erase things, it only made them thicker, heavier, and more dangerous, because with each passing day they became entangled with new consequences. When Alan appeared, Leslie understood that everything she had repressed for 2 decades had reached the moment of overflowing, like a dam that had been cracked for too long and finally burst, dragging with it mud, debris, and everything that stood in its path. His return, therefore, carried many layers of meaning. It did not simply expose the greatest lie of Leslie's life, it also marked the precise moment when anyone positioned too close to the truth would begin to feel its heat. The secrets that had been tightly locked away for 20 years no longer lay obediently still, they started to stir, to make their own noise, to draw curious glances and questions that could no longer be brushed aside with a few vague explanations. At Fairmont Crest, where people had grown used to living inside stories carefully edited and curated, the emergence of a truth that refused to be controlled was the most terrifying threat of all. Leslie knew she would not be the only one pulled into this storm, but that knowledge brought her no relief. On the contrary, it birthed a different sort of guilt, the sense that the choices she had once labeled as for everyone's sake were now transforming into a double-edged blade, capable of cutting deeply into the very lives she had wanted to shield. Amid this heavy atmosphere, Fairmont Crest still looked unchanged on the surface. Manicured lawns trimmed to perfection, houses glowing with warm lights, polite smiles fixed on the faces of its residents. Yet for Leslie, everything had shifted from the moment her eyes met Alan's quiet gaze. The surroundings felt like nothing more than a backdrop for a performance whose script she no longer controlled. She understood that from now on, every step she took, every word she spoke, every look exchanged between herself and Eva, between herself and the people around them, could be examined under the lens of a new truth. That feeling of being driven into a corner made her throat tighten, but it also forced her to confront something she had always avoided: the truth does not disappear just because people pretend not to see it. It waits patiently behind the years, waiting to be called by its real name, waiting for the moment when a familiar pair of eyes appears out of the darkness of a Fairmont Crest evening and sweeps away all the dust Leslie once believed was thick enough to cover everything. Thank you all for your loyal support.